Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did. They absolutely predictively got it correct, and this is Tom Novolis, your host, and I am delighted that you are here with me again this week. And what an interesting week it has been. This past Tuesday, we had the midterm elections. And no surprise to myself, I never did expect a red wave to occur, but now you have Biden standing there and flaunting the idea of it, if he can flaunt anything that he can think. Oh, anyway, it's not nice, I know, to criticize the ill, and he's very ill. But I wanted to take a different turn on the analysis of these events of this past week. I want to take the turn of what people miss inside their state constitutions and in the fact that they don't have people actually functioning for a true vote. And not to use the term true the vote, because I guess there's an organization in relationship to that, but a true vote, a vote that one can understandably have confidence in. I know many folks are saying, hey, let's just go back to the paper ballot. That has its own issues, as we all know. But as we consider, let's step into just a quick historical perspective on how did the voting machines come about. And I will tell you that it's very interesting that the use of a mechanical form of voting in Ohio was actually considered and made a legal means of voting back in 1912. And then what it did is it got even more solidified as a means of voting in 1967. It's interesting that then it took us all the way to the, Al Gore, or how'd they say it? Al Gore type of election with Bush, to look at the historical perspective on why we moved to the electronic voting because of the shards of those little pieces of paper that were going through the mechanical tabulators. You see, that was what we were using, was for a long time, many states, not all states, but many states used, the punch card system or method. I remember doing that in one of the states that we resided in. Out of Stanford, they made an argument. This was a project that was done back in 2006, and arguing why we should move to electronic voting. And at that time, they were saying, it was more secure, that voters could believe in it, that theoretically electronic voting would institute the significant greater security for the voter, knowing that their vote would be counted. It would reduce cost. You wouldn't have to have all of the vote counters at that time that we used to have that sat there and actually went through and could tabulate very, very quickly. And the biggest issue of the day was with the shards, was to minimize potentials for fraud. So those were all the interesting reasons of the day to look at why, as we went back into 1996, that electronic voting would make more sense, and the arguments around that. Also, what I have for you is a website that actually takes you through the types of voting machines that are out there. How do they work? And how they have increased in the mechanisms of voting in our most recent history, and how many have gone into more electronic, or like we have in Ohio, we actually have a paper form that you fill out, the ballot, and then that goes into a reader, basically an ORC scanner that scans and then tabulates it, and there's always a paper copy available for any types of challenges that may come up. But what I would like to take you into is what we saw as a constitutional amendment in 2015 and then again in 2018 in the state of Ohio. And that amendment was in relationship to what I'm teaching in our class right now on the Ohio Constitution, is on apportionment. What does that mean? How does that function? The way that it was earlier designed in our state was almost virtually the way that it was set up in 1851, in 1967. There were significant changes, but then the changes really occurred in 2015 is when it was re-amended, our Article 11 on apportionment, and it really, in so many different ways, some people believe made a simplicity of the redistricting, but it went from the political bodies doing the redistricting to a commission that is structured by virtue of how it is established in that amendment. What I want to bring to your attention, and what we're really going to talk about in the next couple of segments, and we may talk about a few other aspects of the election and what happened in some of the states, Arizona in particular. We'll talk about Arizona a little bit in the second segment. But what I want to bring to your attention is an organization that is called none other than the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. And that redistricting committee, National Democrat Redistricting Committee, is led by none other than Eric Holder. Now, this committee came into existence right around 2009, and it became fully operative in April of 2015. Wow. Just so interesting. And reason of one of the purposes, Eric Holder said, listen to this very closely, the biggest rigged system in America is gerrymandering. Together, we can change that and restore fairness to our democracy. Join our fight, because politicians shouldn't choose their voters. Voters should choose their representatives. Now, Holder, the way that this organization operates is absolutely partisan. So if you think that he's talking about that citizens should do the redistricting, you are in one of those states that are allowing legalized heavy drugs, and you're on them. Because I think that our founders had some good reasons, at least in our state of Ohio, as to how the redistricting should come about. Now, one of the areas that I want to take you through a little bit more as we look at who this National Democrat Redistricting Committee is, it is actually a Democratic Party PAC. It was conceived in late 2016 with operatives of the Democrat Party, so it came into full existence instead of 2015, 2016, and it was also the Obama administration participating in it. And the reason being is that they did not like the midterm elections in the fact that the Republicans won those midterms when Obama was president. And as a result of that, that's where they came up with this idea to go out and to work at how they would ensure that redistricting was fair. If you believe that, once again, you're in one of those states that has wacky tobacco or something or another. But the fact is they clearly say that they are ideologically bent. So in the background here, it talks about wanting that in 2017, the Democrat Party lost control of nearly 1,000 state legislative, gubernatorial, and congressional seats, including 23 governorships, 33 state senates, and 32 state houses. Ladies and gentlemen, that is significant. So when we're looking at now the 2022 midterm and the results of these elections, not only at the national level, but how is it playing out in the states? We're clearly seeing that Florida is now 100%, if you will, not totally, but very clearly in Republican hands, and that hopefully in conservative Republican hands. So what we're seeing now is that when we review and we talk about this red wave that the media was all over and the Republican pundits were standing up and down and claiming, it becomes extremely interesting to see the actual results. Notwithstanding the fact that many of the voting issues from 2020 were not fixed. They were not fixed in Arizona, Maricopa County. I talked to some folks down there earlier this week, and they clearly identified that those people in Maricopa County should have been fired. And you have to understand that the woman that is running for governor against Carrie Lake, the Democrat, won't even mention her name, was Secretary of State, and it was her responsibility to ensure voter integrity in the machines. How's that working? Pennsylvania, same issue. New Jersey, big time issues, Dominion machines. Let's go on. Let's think about this in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in many of the areas that had problems in 2020, having problems again because they are humanoid problems, people problems, moral issues. And we'll talk about some of those moral issues as we move into the third segment later on. But I do want you to come back into the second segment because we're going to go through a little bit more here on this National Democrat Redistricting Committee, and that as a 527 Political Action Committee, it pursues partisan mission of electing Democrats to public office. That's its mission. That's what it's set up to do. And it's doing that by how things are redistricted, how the boundaries are redone in the various states in relationship to the 2010 census and now this most recent census that we have just gone through. So, ladies and gentlemen, come on back because I'm going to take you even into none other than Politico, who's done an analysis on what's happened in redistricting. And we're going to talk about that in the second segment. Now, Sam Adams, he was all about fair elections, and he was definitely about only citizens voting and making sure that every aspect of our elections were from a moral and well adjudicated position for the citizenry. Come on back in the next segment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment. Samuel Adams returns. The Anti-Federalists got it correct. This is Tom Navolis. And here we go back into this whole idea of the National Democratic, what is it? They're calling it a redistricting committee. And how they're looking at from a very partisan perspective on how to take and get the boundaries redrawn in what they're calling a favorable manner for all parties. Really? So the first formation of this organization came about in a Democratic group that brings together major party organizations on a multi-cycle, state-by-state redistricting strategy and ahead of the 2020 census. Folks, they were thinking this thing through while you were taking, and I don't know what you were doing. But before the census went into effect, they were already building a strategy as how they would force redistricting to the benefit of their ideology. So it came through that they did funding. They pitched to roughly 50 major liberal donors by individuals closely connected with the Obama administration by July of 2016. Then they did so again at the Democrat National Convention in Philadelphia. The pitch was reportedly led by Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe, Connecticut Governor Malloy, a Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Ray Lejeune, and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. So they were in collusion to do this. Participants in the initial fundraising pitch reportedly included representatives from, here's the different groups, whatever this AFSCME is, the AFL-CIO, you know who they are, the National Education Association, Emily's List, Planned Parenthood, League of Conservation Voters, the Sierra Club, and America Votes. Members of the Democrat Governors Association, Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee, Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, and the Democratic Aligned House Majority PAC were also present for and doing the fundraising. Really amazing. And then it goes on what they did. Now, here's something here is that they actually, Political reported that President Obama was fully briefed on this fundraiser, and he is 100% committed both in short term and after he leaves office to it. And that the Democratic consultant, Mitch Stewart, who served as a battleground state director in Obama's 2012 reelection campaign, he was on board with it. So then they also had some other people that were highly leveled in the Democrat Party, and mostly progressive politics has been briefed and is supported, including the Hillary Clinton campaign. Now, they actually here go through and talk about tactics. So they use a number of approaches to influence the 2021 redistricting effort and elect Democrat politicians to state and federal legislatures, supporting state ballot initiatives using targeted litigation, developing partnerships with other liberal groups, and funding political campaigns. We had a lot of litigation that went on here in the state of Ohio, and I'm sure there were in other states if we really take and go through. Now, they also did state ballot initiatives that went through, and here, look, wow, they did its 2018 ballot initiative targets include where else but in Michigan, Ohio, Colorado, Arizona, Missouri, South Dakota, and Utah. These initiatives also organize liberal groups friendly to the NDRC. Fair Districts PA, for example, is a Pennsylvania arm of the left-leaning League of Women Voters. And it played a key role in litigating a court decision that tossed out the state's 2011 congressional map. So in Ohio, not only did we have and see our Constitution amended, that was amended in 1967, but again in 2015. And as we're seeing here, as this initiative was placed for ballots in 2018 in Ohio, and they really changed our apportionment in our Constitution. I talk about it in the class. I do a comparison all the way back from our 1851 Constitution, how it was amended specifically in 1967, then what happened in 2015 and 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, the depth of the insidiousness on what they're calling fairness led to multiple court cases, and the fact that every time the legislature came up with the appropriate formats for redistricting, it was challenged. And that was the plan. And with targeted what? Litigation. Targeted litigation. The NDRC targets Republican state elected officials for lawsuits accusing them of illegally gerrymandering districts under the Voting Rights Act and related legislation. Two of these lawsuits in Georgia and Wisconsin were initiated by its sister organization, the National Redistricting Foundation. So, as all of the Republicans are sitting there scratching their heads and wondering what happened in this midterm election, they were blindsided because of their arrogance, their power mongering, all of their game playing, all of their political party power brokering. They're sitting there and sticking their thumbs into their suspenders and showing off how wonderful they can come in there and bring on the red wave. No. They absolutely were rope-a-doped. They had the false hands sitting there just tagging them along, pulling them back, thinking they had them, getting them up against the ropes and saying, we got those Democrats, look at that, we got them up against the ropes, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But these people had a strategy that began in 2014. And then we're developing it into an organization that launched in 2016 that put a dam across the waterways that stopped a perceived red wave by working through and getting it constitutionally changed in the state of Ohio so that this perceived idea of gerrymandering would not occur. So let's look at this. I mean, the link is there at samueladamsreturns.net for you to go look, and you can see this whole idea on the gerrymandering, this whole organization, and just how it's trying to move with these left-of-center progressive campaign coordinations that would take and come against actual citizens in red states like Ohio. That's why we were seeing so many states being said that they were going from red conservative to even purple. A lot has been going on. So you have all these groups aligning together. And quite honestly, if you follow anything that I've been talking about in communism in America, and I talked about agitation and activism last week, there it is, folks. 100% in play. So it goes here, Eric Holder's targeting the general elections in 2020. He did that. So when we look at even the 2020 election, Eric Holder was already working the game on this. So it wasn't just the election fraud. You have to look at what happened at the down tickets. So many people were going, well, Trump won up here, and what happened with the down tickets? There it is. There is the answer. The down tickets were lost to Democrats because of what this organization did. Here they talk about the 2018 midterms, talk about 2020 general election. They go on to the National Redistricting Foundation, which is the nonprofit, and we can talk about some of that. But let's talk about results. The results. Let's go to Politico. Politico. Ladies and gentlemen, I have that link here, how redistricting shaped the midterm election. 2022 midterm elections were affected by states redrew every congressional district in the U.S. We're tracking how the new lines tipped the balance of power in Congress. This is at Politico. Beautiful chart. So what they start with, wins where Republicans oversaw redistricting, and they're showing that Democrats 42 seats, GOP 131 seats. So they're claiming that was gerrymandering. Wins where independent groups oversaw redistricting. Here's Eric Holder's dream. 56 of the seats went to Democrats and 27 to Republicans. Wins where Democrats oversaw redistricting. 29 to Democrats, 5 to Republicans. Wins where the courts oversaw it. 54 to Democrats and 41 to the GOP or Republicans. So now we can go through how Democrats and Republicans fared after redistricting. And it goes on to say in some states, how many House seats each party wins can be tracked back to who drew the lines to begin with. So the first chart that they show here is that Republicans oversaw the redistricting process in 18 states. And it shows those states: Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Utah, New Mexico, Missouri, Nebraska, Missouri, Kansas, Arkansas, Tennessee, West Virginia, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, and Texas. And then it shows graphically how those seats went, how many were won by the Democrats and how many by Republicans, and in what states, how those numbers played out. Very, very interesting on how all that functioned. Then it does the same thing with the independent groups, does the same thing for the Democrats, and once again for the courts. Ladies and gentlemen, all of this is at SamuelAdamsReturns.net. It's amazing to understand that, yes, gerrymandering can happen, but there are simple ways of doing that. And one of the simple ways of not doing gerrymandering is that you have a moral people that elect moral representatives to act morally and godly within their office of government. Wow, when's the last time that happened? Hey, let's try the American Revolution for the most part, is when that first happened. Well, ladies and gentlemen, come on back as we go to the third segment of Samuel Adams Returns, the Anti-Federalists. They did get it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns, those Anti-Federalists. They got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host, and I am delighted that you are with me. I just want to make sure that everybody understands out there in the St. Louis market, that those that are listening, that just to remind you, by February, this program will no longer be on the air in your market. We just don't have the capacity to carry it forward and continue to be on air there on the Wilkins Network. So come February, you won't be hearing any more from myself and this programming. Now, what we did talk about in the last segment, for all of those in the markets that only get the first and third segment, is that how both the 2020 election as well as this midterm election were not all about fraud. There's obviously some fraud going on out there. Why are the machines in Arizona, New Jersey going the way they're going? What's happening with that? What's going on now? There's an article that I was just looking at here where there's another suspect truck loaded after polling places, hauling off with ballots or bringing ballots in, whatever. So is there fraud? I'm sure. There's always been fraud in elections. That is nothing new. It's just what's been going on. But what's more important is what I talked about in the second segment, where, yes, there was planned events, plans that operated at the very core of redistricting in the various states. And as I talked about, Ohio being one of those states that was well planned, and what we saw happen here in 2018 to our Constitution. And you'll have to go back to the second segment to hear more about that. Now, what I wanted to bring to you is two aspects in this third segment. One is a very interesting exit poll that I think says a lot about our educational system, our educational destruction, mind-bending destruction of our students. So the exit poll that they were showing in relationship to this is the ages of 18 to 29. The majority of the voters cast their ballots for Democrats. In fact, favorably, 63% of the time is what the exit polling data is showing. Now, this NBC poll shows that the Generation Z and the millennials, that was 63% for Democrats to about 35% for Republicans. And then when you break that demographic even down more on the ages, that 12%, in contrast to those 30 to 44, actually made, or that demographic, I'm sorry, of the 18 to 29-year-olds was only 12% of the electorate. Now, the 30 to 44-year-olds are 21% of the electorate, and they voted 51% of the time for Democrats and 47% of the time for Republicans. That's amazing. So you're looking at that 18 to 44-year-old group that have been inculcated with socialism, communism, immorality, the destruction of what it means from a cultural American historical perspective. Because that's what the Democrats are, flat out, communist. And so they've done a really great job in the institutions which they are. If you think of their mental institutions, universities are really mental institutions is what they are. There's no other way of saying it. Let's see. Meanwhile, ages 45 to 64, which are 39% of the electorate, 44% vote for Democrats, 54% for Republicans. And then all us old folks, 65 and older, they account for 28% of the electorate, and only 43% support the demons, and 55% support the Republicans. And it really goes down into a nice breakdown of this demographic in the 18 to 29-year-olds, even though they're small at that 12%, they look at things, and the way that is supporting the Democrats is that they were so unified in their vote, so more so than the other age categories, and voting for the Democrats at such a high margin. I think that was extremely interesting. And then more specifically is what this article is talking about, is that the 18 to 24-year-olds, which account for 7% of the electorate, support Democrats by a margin of 61 to 36%. And then the 25 to 29-year-olds, which is 6% of that grouping of that demographic, favor Democrats even by a higher margin. So let's think about that for a minute. 18 to 24-year-olds, some of them haven't been fully indoctrinated in the institutions. They've been getting it in secondary school, they've been getting it in high school, but they haven't been totally brainwashed. Now, those that are 25 to 29, as they come out, look what's been going on in the economy and everything that we have, the destruction that we've seen in the churches, the moral destruction in the nation, and that 25 to 29 think they're hopeless. So what are they looking for? Government as their salvation, and the Democrats are the ones that are promising that. So they go with 65% voting for Democrats. So the whole aspect of that group, that whole demographic, you take and you break it down and look at it even from a racial perspective, is that in that 18 to 29-year-old, 8% of the electorate voted for, were more, they're the white voters, and they by far vote more for Republicans than Democrats. So they're 58 to 40% in that age category that are white. Latino voters between 18 and 29, 3% of the electorate support Democrats, 68 to 30%. Meanwhile, the black voters, 18 to 29, account for just 1% of the electorate, but they support Democrats overwhelmingly by 89% of the time. Interesting. So I think that's a pretty good article. And the references there at samueladamsreturns.net for you to take a look at. There's other interesting articles all over the internet in relationship to the demographics, in relationship to what has been going on with this election cycle. And I have to say, as I mentioned before, I never thought that this was going to be a red wave. So it is what it is. And as I take a sip of my coffee, I want to talk to you a little bit about now the accountability issues. We need to have our plan on accountability. I've not seen a lot of the groups out there yet really driving on that. I have to say that I saw an article come across from the John Birch Society that was actually talking about accountability and how to hold or instill accountability into those that have been recently elected, and hopefully even those that are incumbents that are in office. Well, we know that has to be done at all levels, local, county, state, as well as federal. Federal is always very difficult because of the great swamp and machine and all of the money mandates that are put on new elected persons when they get to the House. They're right away put into the grinder and saying, now that you're here, you have to raise so much money and you have to do this, and this is committees. And if you want to have an effect in this committee, you need to go raise this amount of money and blah, 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 blah. Kind of that way at the state level, but you have a little bit more opportunity because remember, when you're 1 in 1.2 million people, your voice isn't very loud when it comes to your federal representative. And when it comes to the Senate, you have no voice at all unless you are a Peter Thiel or an Elon Musk or any of the other billionaires that I notated about in the last program or two that have a capacity to be heard when they make a phone call. So what do? Well, we have school boards. We definitely have those local political people. You have your county representatives as well as you have, like we have trustees in our townships, as well as you have your state legislature. The accountability has to be taken from your constitution, your state constitution. That's why earlier in the year I was going through the state constitutions and I was putting them up there, in particular with your Bill of Rights. There's two happenings, two events that occur when a person then becomes elected to office. And the most important of the two primary events is that they take an oath to their office. Secondly, depending on your state, they are either bonded, insured, or some other mechanism that they have to bring surety to ensure that they have a financial backing in case of something that goes wrong. So they become bonded, like here in Ohio. And the most important of those two is the oath of office. That's a moral obligation. Most of them don't recognize that. The area that we need to really start to press on is personal moral responsibility. For instance, in the state of Ohio, we reelected a governor who's really a Democrat. And you know how you know he's a Democrat? Well, you look at everything that he's done. In Ohio, he was number one lockdown guy. But worse, and here's the most important place to understand. Go look at their administration. Who are the people in the administration? Who are the people that they appoint to the various boards in the administration? So, for instance, let's just take education here in the state of Ohio as a quick example in this last minute and a half, is that the governor appoints 9 people on the state board of education. All 9 of those people on the State Board of Education appointed by Governor Des Moines are leftist. They're leftist. How is that conservative? How is that even Republican when they are leftist? Look at every other department that's out there. And let's hold these elected, first off, morally accountable to their oath, which means they are morally accountable to the Bill of Rights in your Constitution. The Bill of Rights is what holds your liberty in your state constitution, let alone the federal. Don't even think about that. Focus back on your state constitution's Bill of Rights and moral accountability to that by your elected people. Get involved in a group. Get involved in your church group. Take the time to meet with others, no different than what Eric Holder did with all the leftists, to join together in groups to form accountability. Well, they call it accountability, but it's redistricting. You know, Sam Adams was saying that that's definitely what has to happen. There's a constitution only can function properly with a moral people. How about you? Come on back next week when Samuel Adams returns.